If you've got 5 acres or more of wooded or partially wooded land, here's one of the things that we do here at Prosperity Homestead that makes a massive difference in the utility value of that land. First off, I'm Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead. The land that we have under management for clients tend to look more like wildlife management areas or parks than they do like somebody's backyard. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at how the land expresses itself already. We're looking at, is it hilly? Is it level? Does it have openings? Does it have different kinds of fruit trees, nut trees, hardwoods, softwoods? We want to know what the land is already doing because that tells us about the soil profile. That tells us about the health of the forest, and it gives us ideas about the types of wildlife that might be on the property. We're going to walk the property. We're going to look at it by satellite, and we're going to look for areas where there are nuts on the ground, where there are scrapings, where there are other elements that indicate how animals or humans move across that land. Now, of course, we're going to interview the landowner and find out what they want to do with the land, but if you own a piece of land that's a swamp, you're not going to have fields and grow hay on it. If you've got something that's heavily wooded, you're not going to be able to do large garden plots. We want to go from what the client wants to where it's at, where the current land is at, and then start working backwards to bridge that gap. So I'm working with a piece of land right now that has got mostly woods. It was clear cut a long time ago, and it was allowed to grow back with scrub brush. The woods that have grown back, there's probably not a tree over 12 feet anywhere on the 24 acres that are there. There's a few here and there, but mostly we've got shrubs and trees and just pines and everything just all tight and compacted. Now, this tight compaction means it's very difficult to move across that land, so the owner wants to turn it into a large farm, but right now there's not even a way to access it. So what we did is we actually mapped out historical roads using satellite images. We then mapped out different elevations and access points. We looked at where the contours were in relationship to these historical access points. We looked at where there's water issues. So we walked out there with the GPS and tagged stuff. There's rock piles in the woods. That tells us that the land used to be used for cattle or for some kind of tillage. There's old farm equipment back there. It tells us there might have been a farm there in the past. But we also found big piles of trash and old construction materials and a lot of junk. So not only are we just finding this stuff, but we're geotagging it. See, if we find junk that's in the middle of a woods that was a clearing 5 years ago, that might be junk that somebody brought in and dumped. That tells us that we need to have better gates. We need to have better access for the property. We might need to set up some cameras in order to monitor people accessing the land, especially after we open it up. But what we're doing, though, is we mapped out historical roads. We got that on land. And the best thing was not to clear the land. It would be very easy to clear the land because it's got small trees on it. However, if you want to hunt on that land, if you want to stimulate wildlife on that land, and if you want to have recreational activities such as hiking or camping on that land, as it moves towards the owner's goal of being a farm, then if you just clear it off as a clean slate, you're not going to have the value of that. So what we decided to do was get a forest mulcher and forest mulch the historical roads. Now, you'll see some videos of this and some details on our website at www.prosperityhomestead.org or on our YouTube channel. But here's the thing. By opening up the area using a forest mulcher, now the owner can drive out on the property. The owner can go camping on the property. It gives us some nice hunting lines because we actually created a few new roads. So there were roads on the property before, but there are a couple areas where a nice contour line gives us better access between two road points. And you can pretty much drive a truck on 80% of the property now. Now we've gone back in since the forest mulching and we're widening up some of the access points. We're also looking at different lines of sight that have good backstops because that's important for us when we're talking about hunting. You don't want to be firing a rifle back there and not have a good backstop. We're also looking at if we were going to take that next step, which is to get goats on the property. Because see, a overgrown piece of property with a lot of scrub brush and a lot of low-hanging branches, is just a wonderland for goats. So it's also a wonderland for deer. There's definitely deer out there. But by looking at these different points, what we're able to do is say to the owner, hey, look, this is what you want to achieve. You want to achieve it in 5 years. Now, instead of spending all the money to make it happen now, what can we do to utilize the land now, to benefit from the land now, while helping it further express its current nature? So there are areas on this particular piece of property, like there might be on your property, where there are hardwood trees. They're just small today. Well, if you clear out all the scrub in that hardwood area and get a little bit more light in there, like our paths and trails are doing, then you're going to start getting those hardwoods to grow. Now, the paths and trails have value because I think we put in about 3 miles of trail. We put in, there's a main access road that's about a half mile long, or about a mile long. So basically you can drive in on this trail, and then there's probably 4 or 5 paths that intersect that trail that go into the property. And then we've tried to make a path around the property line where it's level. And these things are different for every piece of land. It depends on what kind of things that you have out there. Now, we've collected 40, 50 pounds of nuts and different types of native trees for the area, and we're starting those up in a nursery, so that as we remove trees, we can then put back trees that we want, that are more desirable for the property. The owner would like to put honey locust on the perimeter of the property. Now, honey locust won't grow in the shade, because what he's essentially like is an English natural fence, where we mound the materials, because there's an old barbed wire fence in the woods. And instead of pulling all the barbed wire fence out, what we're going to do is cut the fence line clean. And then we're going to start piling these rocks and in dirt and different things on the old fence line, and then plant it out with hedge plants. So honey locust, privet, different kind of Russian olive, different kind of hedges. And then we'll just fold that hedge over for the next couple of years and get a nice, thick English hedge. Now, it's not the kind you were going to have to cut and knock over. It's going to be the kind you can walk up along the edge with a chainsaw and just cut out the big stuff and fold it over into itself. But again, if you can drive a truck around the perimeter of the property, you can get access to different paddocks. You can get access to maybe outbuildings. You can start getting an idea where you want to build a house. And that's how we start working into the land. So another thing that we'll do with clients is we'll sit down and do a design plan on paper. So we'll look at these historic roads, and before we even spend a penny on any type of tree removal, forestry, or anything else, we start building out that design plan. We say, well, what do we want this property to look like? Based on the contours and the elevations, where would you like a house? And now all this stuff comes together, and it gives the owner a better approach to the property, so they're not spending large chunks of money to get the property where they want it to be, but they're getting opportunities to go out and camp on the weekend, to go out and hike. This particular piece of land, I talked to some folks that are mountain biking on the land. The trails are a little soft because of the forest mulcher, but they're able to get out and walk it. And that forest mulch trail feels so comfortable and is really enjoyable today. They didn't have to wait till the land was cleared. They didn't have to wait till they started to get their house together. They didn't have to wait till they had a little cabin out there. They can use it today. And that's what we mean by increasing the utilization of your property. Now, it doesn't matter if you have a small farm, a homestead, or an estate. It doesn't matter if you have 5 acres or 500 acres. The plan is the same. You also want to look at water. So access water. Then you want to look at any structures that might already be on the land. We did find a cinder block building. We found a foundation for a couple old barns. These things you need to know about, because there might have been a reason they put that barn in that location. Now, what we found out is that looking at the historic roads, this particular barn is right next to a forest road. So that might be an ideal place to put another barn. They're going to have goats on the property. If we're thinking about where do we want the goat house, by the way, there's piles of rocks out there. Those areas would be great for goats, because goats love to climb on stuff. But if there's already been an area that had a shelter on it, and there's a road to get access to the shelter, why pay the money for a bulldozer to build a new road? Now, again, this is contrary to how most people manage land. Most people will just clear the land off. They'll burn all the brush in a giant pile, and then they'll start building a house. And then years later, they start thinking, the house isn't quite where they need it to be, and they build something else, and they build something else, and it becomes a patchwork rather than a defined or designed property. See, when we treat it like a wildlife management area, we're working with nature rather than trying to shape and cultivate nature to the way we want it. And this does require a time perspective. Now, in a year, you can make property useful, but you may want to take a little bit more time so you can get familiar with the land. It takes understanding that sometimes the land's going to dictate things that you don't want. So, for example, this land that I'm talking about right now, there were several areas where on a map, it looked like the historical road would go through a certain area. It was contoured out, but when the forest mulcher got in there, there's an 8-foot deep ditch. So it turns out that some of these roads weren't well managed, and so on the historical pictures, they were roads, but they actually eroded out tremendously. So we had to end up doing a little going around the ditch, which we now have access to do erosion management, but we also have access. It caused us to have to go off the contour. Now, when you go off contour, you go uphill. So we went off contour, upslope, cut around, and got back onto our contour line and finished off. But again, sometimes what you see on the maps is different than what you're going to see in real life, and you can make adjustments for that. But when we work with nature and we work with the property, what we tend to have happen is immediate value from the land. Now, let's say it was a more mature forest and there were large trees there. We might go and have the property forested, but I wouldn't use a clear-cut type of forester. You'll see it many times over. The forester comes out, rips out all the trees. You get the money for the trees, and they leave your property a wreck. Erosion problems, exposure issues, removing a lot of the native vegetation, in many cases damaging the land. My approach is to work with a forester that does ecological management. So what they're going to end up doing is they're going to expand on those roads. So I already cut some roads on the property based on the historical roads. They would actually widen those roads, and then they'd start taking out trees selectively, leaving behind the underbrush in most areas, and in other areas completely clearing it out. And so if there were mature trees on this particular property, we probably could have got the client's home site put in, but and they could have still had the trails, but ultimately there wasn't. So it really depends on your property. Anyway, if you have a specific property you want me to look at, I can use technology. There's soil maps, there's LiDAR, there's different types of satellite images that I have access to, historical images, all that kind of stuff. I'd be more than happy to look at a piece of property that you have. The consultation that we do really informs the homeowner or the property owner, the landowner. It informs them about what kind of land they have and helps them get closer to using it the way they like to. And then what I love to do, because it makes such a difference to the landowner, is I like to learn about how you want to use that land, so that today we can immediately get some value to it. One of the things about this particular piece of property I'm using as an example here is that these trails and roads are extremely accessible by a four-wheeler. So this particular landowner wants to be able to hike the land. They want to be able to bike the land. They want to be able to get around on a four-wheeler, and they want to start doing some hunting. So now they've got nice clean trails, nice clean lines of sight. There's a 12-acre I call it a pasture, but it's a 12-acre area that you can traverse the entire perimeter of this 12 acres. And the deer, there isn't a deer that can get in or out of that 12 acres without you seeing them. And then on the other side of the property, total is 24 acres. There's another 12 acres. It's a little bit more narrow. It's not as desirable to hunt, but the way we cut the trails in, you can fire into the 12-acre paddock from the other areas. And so you got good tree cover for backage. And if you're, we did a map for the client. If you're looking at it right, you actually have hills and mounds as your backstop when it comes to hunting. Now, bow hunting is completely different. But again, it's about bridging the gap between what your land is today and what you want it to be. And doing that informed by what the land used to be used for and how the land was interacted with in the past, as well as the ecology of the land today. If you have any questions about what I've covered, I'm Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead. Visit us at www.prosperityhomestead.org. I'd be more than happy to answer your questions. I'm here to help small farms, homesteads, and estates get maximum value from their land using ecologically sound methods that actually enhance the ecology of your property. Thanks for listening.